Hi,
And hold on. Okay, we're recording. Go.
hi. I'm Chris Corbell,
I'm Randall Mills.
and we are arts and entertainment
Arts and
with
Entertainment with Chris and
Chris and
Randall.
Randall. We're learning it, folks. It's our second time, so eventually we're going to get this thing down. And last episode, we had an idea, but we got sidetracked by cats.
Yeah, we started talking about the
But at
movie
the end of
Cats.
but cats led to Monkees.
The
And
Monkees.
Monkees is much more what we are about today. And when I say Cats, I meant the musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber. And when I meant the Monkees, I meant the TV series from the late 60s. That's now a band. Well, you get my point. Right, Randall?
Right. Hey.
We're the Monkees. People say we monkey around. Okay, that's why I'm not in the Monkees. Did you ever watch the TV show The Monkees or listen
Me?
to the band The Monkees?
Yeah, I watched it as a kid in syndication.
Well, me too. I mean, I'm not, I'm in my mid 50s. I'm not in my mid 70s.
You didn't see it first run?
No, I was like, yeah, man. I was living out on Ivar and Vine, and I was just, getting high, and I'd sit here with David Crosby, and we just, we'd do some hashish, and we just watch those guys, and then
It's funny because this is our topic this is supposed to be our topic is Hollywood.
It is our topic. It is really.
But here's what I was gonna say. This is what I was thinking is the Monkees. It was hard for me to watch a syndication. Like it was hardly ever on. And all those far out shows from that era, that were pushing the envelope, like the Monkees and Laughing, and I don't know what else.
Fuck it to me. Yeah, I hear you.
A lot of those didn't really do well in syndication. It was like they were of their time, and they were
they were
way too far
of their
out.
time. Yeah,
like people weren't doing enough LSD. LSD was legal, right? LSD.
Yeah,
it was like the Nazis.
Well, you're getting a little ahead of. Can I hold you back for just a sec? Because
no,
I want the audience to kind of know what we're talking about before we just dive in. Because the topic of today is Los Angeles, Hollywood in the late 60s, as captured by what was really going on at the time, and also by films about that time, documentaries about that time, and stuff that you can watch right now if you're at home and you want to watch some of the things that we're talking about, including, I believe, even the Monkees. I'll look it up in a minute, but I think you can actually watch the Monkees. I think it's streaming on one of the streaming services. Do you know which one?
Me, no, but I'm sure people can find it. But you would.
But I want to give the audience an idea of what is it that we're going to be talking about today. It was what we were going to be talking about actually on our first episode, which is movies and stuff that fascinates us about LA in the late 60s during what they would call the scene, which the Monkees is definitely a big part of. And for those of you who are watching and don't know me, or they don't know Randall, which I think is kind of weird, but maybe you don't, we live in Los Angeles. So this is the world that we are living in today, right, man?
True.
I mean, you live not even a block away from the famous Whiskey A Go Go.
Yeah, I live right off the Sunset Strip by the Whiskey, Roxy, stuff like that.
I mean, you're in the thick of it, man. Yeah, you're in the thick of it,
Well, I guess
Westwood, which is a different kind of thick of it.
Well, I guess this
go ahead.
But I guess this area, like, it had its last peak in like the 80s, the late 80s, when the hair metal bands were playing. I guess like bands like Guns N' Roses came out of that scene. Poison.
But that's for another show. Let's just keep it.
But that was the end of it.
Psychedelic. Let's keep it 60s LA.
I'm saying 60s LA is like gone. It's dead, man. It's like.
Well, yeah, but let's talk about the stuff that covered it in its time. That is a show today. We're really going to talk about our fascination for what was it? Maybe.
So we're going to talk about like what you can watch to really get that feel of 60s LA, right? And like what were the titles?
Maybe the Monkees. I just think about it. Maybe the Monkees were the gateway drug for us as children.
Maybe.
Because I mean, I like the Beatles and all that, but they weren't like I remember watching the Monkees. I don't think I watched it on Saturday. I think it was on where I lived, like Monday through Friday for syndication. How about you?
Yeah, they syndicated it for like kids after school sometimes.
Right, and so that was really like my first introduction to that kind of, I don't even know what you call it, that kind of funky, hippie, cool, jazzy thing.
I think the word that I've usually read is psychedelic. Like when
Yeah,
people
but
describe that
yeah,
aesthetic, that era, they use psychedelic, that word. And, you know, it
yeah,
makes
and
a lot of sense because, again, I was
sure.
talking about LSD. You know, LSD was like a big influence because LSD was legal. You know, it's like LSD
Yeah,
was totally legal until, I don't know what year, like late 60s. And then,
late 60s. So that's definitely a part of the scene, but I just want to like talk about where does it start? And I would say for me, it starts just before the Monkees with a children's movie, which I loved at the time, called The Yellow Submarine. Did you ever see that?
you think
With the
you're gonna
Beatles?
start the whole psychedelic era with Yellow Submarine?
No, I'm going to start our interest in that era with The Yellow Submarine. As far as like the colors, that's a very psychedelic film.
You think that was your
Yeah,
first real taste when you were a kid? That was your first real taste of that era?
yeah, of course,
I'm
have
gonna
to have
say
been.
my
I
first
saw
real
that in the
taste.
theater because I'm 10 years older than you.
Well, what year did
So
you see it?
I back in the 70s when they would play it in the movie theaters. Before you were born, we didn't have VCRs. And if you saw a movie and you liked it one year, it would come back the next year. So my mom, in her infinite wisdom, every time that movie came around, brought it back. Now, true, that's not about LA. It's not about America. And I think you are right. The Monkees really kind of brought it home to me that there was this place called California, and not just the California I was watching on TV where like Aid and Enough is happening, or the Brady's, or the Partridges, but a very particular groovy 60s Los Angeles. That was what the Monkees was all about for me as a kid.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these other titles that
Well,
really.
we can get into it, but I want to have this conversation with you, man. Like we
What's the
got some
convers?
time.
What are you asking me?
Well, I'm like, what? Like, I guess, what was your take on the Monkees? Let's talk about the Monkees for
You
a
know,
few
I
minutes.
wanted to say, I guess my first taste of the whole psychedelic aesthetic was, and you're gonna think I'm crazy, but was like Sesame Street and the Electric Company. It was kids shows because a lot of the people
No,
that made
there.
kids
I
shows at
hear
the
you, man.
time, they were like they were freaked out freaks. Like, for instance, uh, Jim Henson. Like, did Jim Henson ever do LSD?
No,
But he was
no,
a
no,
freaked out
not to
freak.
my
He
knowledge.
was totally of that era. Like if you look at his work, like he was doing before the Muppet Show, he was doing like little bits on the Tonight Show. You know, back when the
Yeah,
Tonight Show
but
was
that's
cool.
still pretty straight. But like, dude, this show is about LA in the 60s. Can we just try to get a little closer to the topic? Just a little,
Yeah, go
about
on.
LA.
Yeah, go on.
Because I'm just saying Sesame Street was New York City. It was actually in my neighborhood. I love Sesame Street, but like when did you get this, I don't know, in your mind, when did the mythic quality that is that LA of the 60s kind of enter your
Yeah, now you got me
consciousness?
thinking about it. I don't know. Just
For
from
me it was,
TV, just from TV, I guess. Just
yeah,
from
TV.
TV shows.
So did you ever like, do you find like, is there a part of you, like, I forgot, you got here before I got here because you were from Hawaii to San Bernardino. So how old were you when you first came to Los Angeles?
Well, my mother, she took us to Los Angeles as kids, like me and my brother and sister, like on just like a family trip. I don't know, when we were real little. Showed us the
So
sights, Man's
I've been
Ground
like in
Chinese
the
Theater. That was
early
probably like in
80s.
the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, for me, I got here in the early 90s. Is there a part of you that when you, I think it's true for everyone who ever comes to LA, because unlike Des Moines, Iowa, or Tulsa, Oklahoma, there's not like a picture in your head of what Tulsa's going to be like or what Des Moines is going to be like. But like, you've seen every street of LA. You've seen these places so iconic. And
You
then
know,
you get here.
one famous image is from the Guns N' Roses video where Axl Rose gets off the bus.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Jungle. He gets off the bus into Hollywood, and it's like the jungle. And I mean, there was this when I was growing up. There was this image of LA as being like dangerous and full of gangs and crime ridden.
Yeah.
It was that 70s era image. The cities are all different now. I mean, I don't think kids today
Yeah.
understand. And, another thing, like when I moved to LA, like to go to college in the 90s, I would say, there used to be this thing where there used to be all these runaway kids living on the street everywhere. Do you remember that,
Yeah.
Chris?
Of
And
course,
like those kids are gone.
Yeah.
There was this charity called My Friend's Place, I think it is. It's still around, but they help like runaway kids on the street. I don't even know if they have any business anymore.
Well, that's pretty good, man. All right, so let's get to the main point, because we could talk about LA forever, but let's talk about, the canyons. Let's talk about Sunset Strip. Let's talk about the 60s, and let's talk about the things that we were watching that were on this topic.
Well, let's just talk about Mondo Hollywood. You watched it, right?
Well, I want to talk about a lot of things. I'd like to actually hold back on Mondo Hollywood because.
All right, what do you want to talk about?
I think I just want to first just talk about the fact that you and I, let's focus on the canyons first, because that's one of the best things to think come out of that whole 60s scene and early 70s was the music, like the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Joan Baez, all the other groups that I just literally, you could see if my eye went like this, it means I forgot. But a movie came out that I just watched on Netflix called Songs from the Canyon. Is that right?
Is it Echo from the Canyon?
I think it's called Echo from the Canyon. Sorry. It was produced by
right?
Yeah, it's produced by Jacob Dylan, and you saw it, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And what did you think of it?
Yeah, it was really interesting watching all these successful entertainment people sitting around talking about how awesome everything is. I don't know. But they all
come on, man. It is really fascinating to think that, you've been up in the canyon. And for those of you who have never been here, it's a very weird space because, everything is so narrow.
Yeah, Laurel Canyon is it's in the hills. It's there's a lot of little tiny twisting, winding streets made for Model Ts back in the day, and modern cars don't navigate them very well. And
you wouldn't want to drive up them at night.
Yeah, I mean, people live up there, so people drive them. But yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody owns a Hummer up there. You know what I'm saying?
It's almost like something out of Tolkien, though, because these homes are like literally ensconced in the woods, like Bilbo Baggins. And I always feel like it's so very remote.
It feels remote. I mean, it's right there. It's right there next to the big city. But yeah, you drive like a mile up the hill, and you're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how people can know each other. I mean, I've been to those houses out on Coldwater and Laurel, and I've been to the big ones too, and they all seem to share gorgeous, gorgeous views looking down into the basin.
Yeah, there's there's a lot of beautiful views up there looking down. Yep.
I mean, you get a lot of privacy. You get a lot of nature. You don't really feel. For me, when I'm up there, I never feel like I'm in LA.
Okay.
I feel like I'm in some sort of woodland area, so removed from civilization. So anyway, yeah, it is fascinating to think that there was a time where people would just walk over. I don't know how you could walk down those hills or up those hills, but
well, the interesting thing about that area, I think, is the Laurel Canyon area is some of the time. I mean, it might have been lower rent at one point. That's when like you did have like all these hippie kids, well, proto hippie kids, in fact, moving into the big mansions and the big houses up there. They were old houses, from the silent era and stuff, and they were crowding in and sleeping on each other's floors. I mean, Frank Zappa, he moved out of his house. I forget where he went, like to the burbs or something, and then he let a bunch of hippie kids crash in his house for a while. It was in Laurel Canyon. I mean, this is like the beginning of the hippie era, right? This is like
yeah, and there's something that's just so. I feel like even when I'm up there, still there's just something. There's still like some remnant of hippieism there, regardless of how insanely wealthy these people are. There is still, depending on which canyon you're in, because I can't remember. Is it Benedict? There's so many little canyons, and some of them are a bit more upscale, and some of them are a bit more downscale. But there's still that kind of aging hippie feeling over there, don't you feel?
No, I got you. I got you. I mean, yeah. I mean, well, uh, it doesn't feel like you're living in a major city. I mean, you are, but
There's just something about people there that is kind of grainy, so of the earth, of nature. It's not like saying when you're in the Pac Palisades, which I love, but the Pac Palisades is much very modern. Everything's built to the ocean. People have gorgeous new cars. It's not like being in the South Bay. It's not even like being in Pasadena. It's a very particular kind of druidical, nature-loving vibe out there. You could get lost in the canyon and never come back, is what I'm saying. You and the coyotes.
yeah, I never thought about it, but there's probably trails up there. I mean, I know there's parks. There's some open land up there. I mean, I don't know what it's like. I've never been up there that much. I know there's a couple of parks. There's a lake.
It's worth going up there, and it's. I was just up there recently, and I think it was Benedict Canyon. No, off of Mulholland, and then from Mulholland we turned off of Small View, and oh my God, I was terrified because of how high we were physically, and how sharp the turns. But just looking down, I felt like I was in the Mediterranean, somewhere like in Italy.
Supposedly, California has a Mediterranean climate. You've heard that, right?
It is. We're on the same parallel. So I could certainly see why, in that kind of palatial environment, whether you're stoned, sober, or just
you're making
genius,
the case. You're making the case.
I could see how it would inspire.
You're making the case that the hippies come out of the environment because it's the environment.
I would definitely say that Echo in the Canyon, I think, shows the most beautiful part of that time. And I think because it is Jacob Dylan is interviewing people, he's reinterpreting the songs. He does spend time in Hollywood. I'm not saying it's all about the canyon. I think that's what shows the best of it. The movie that really got me thinking was Love and Mercy, Echo from the Canyon available on Netflix, Love and Mercy available for free streaming right now on Hulu. And I know it came out 5 years ago, so you probably saw it when it came out. And that's about Brian Wilson. The film is cut into two. Paul Dano plays the young Brian Wilson during the Pet Sound era. And then John Cusack plays the older Brian Wilson, who was under the care of Dr. Eugene Landy in the early 90s. And they're both really good parts. But the thing that I was really looking at is Brian Wilson also living out there in the Hollywood Hills, also 100% part of that scene. And the way that both the film and also in Echo of the Canyon, they show you his piano at his home in sand. They interview he's in both films. And, to me, the Beach Boys are maybe one of the best parts. And certainly Brian Wilson, definitely one of the best parts that came out of that sound for me. But he comes out with a warning too, because while he put out something as brilliant as Pet Sounds, he's the guy who did the drugs. He's the guy who suffered from depression. He's the one who just, on so many levels, it just fell apart. What do you think of that movie?
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of the movie is to make you feel for Brian Wilson and whatever he went through. Yeah, I mean, you really feel at the end of the movie, you really feel for Brian Wilson. You feel bad for him, whatever. But I
mean, do you feel like you can both share in his joys and pleasures at the same and losses at the same time? I mean, what it must have been like for him to be, like in the studio with French horns and a full band and people as talented as Carol Kay and all these other great session people, and coming up with all these harmonies and different tempos. There was a certain magic going on. There was a certain creative magic.
Well, yeah, I want to say about that.
Echo and
now,
Love and
now
Mercy,
we're on a totally different subject. We're on a totally different subject now, but yeah, that's something good about the movie. It really goes into the recording techniques of the era. I know that a lot of people have in their head that everything always gets better. All the technology always gets better. It's like my I can do the same thing Brian Wilson did back in those days with my MacBook. But that's not true. I mean, all those major studios, all that mechanical equipment, That stuff can't be replicated. You know, I this is something I've been thinking about from this era. You know, there's a peak America. I really believe there's a peak America, and we've passed it. And peak America, what year would you put peak America? I would put it like
I'm not sure if I subscribe to your
1970
theory,
to 75, somewhere in there.
Continue to go with it. Okay.
And
I mean, I lived in 75. It didn't feel like a peak to me. But
all right, well, maybe the late 60s was peak America. I mean, maybe 69, the Summer of Love, maybe that was peak America, you know? And yeah, you watch those old recording studios, you know, I think most of them are gone now.
Oh, no. Actually, a lot of them are still there. The studio on Western is still there. There's a couple of them that you see in Echo in the Canyons. They're still using in Echo in the Canyons just to show you that they're still there. You know, I mean,
right, because you can't do better than that. That's what I'm saying. That's peak America, man.
It's interesting to see how, and I can't remember what of the films we watched said this, but LA is a place where you can come in, be an artist, have a dream, a crazy dream, and just kind of pursue it and embrace it wholeheartedly. And you can meet like-minded people of your tribe and have that experience. I feel, you know, not even as a side thing. I've been watching Samuel L. Jackson on Masterclass, teaching acting. And he talks about moving to New York in the early 80s and finding a community of young actors that he would hang out with, and he'd go to auditions and he'd go to readings and he'd do workshops with, and he'd be part of that scene. And I know as a storyteller for the last 5 years, I've been doing that too. I hang out with other storytellers. We go to each other's shows. We hold workshops.
Well, this brings up the documentary Mondo Hollywood, which I think is the best documentary ever about Hollywood. I know.
Okay, well, let's get to that.
No, let me tell you why. Okay, because you just brought it up. It's your fault, so you can blame yourself.
Okay.
So the reason I'm bringing it up, and we have 5 minutes left by the, and the reason I'm bringing it up is because it really shows what the scene in LA is like. Exactly what you described. Mondo Hollywood is the perfect depiction of that scene. It's just Hollywood, because of the movie industry, is attracted.
Now, for those of you who want to watch it, Mondo Hollywood is available to stream free on YouTube.
So
go ahead, continue. I just want people to be able to have access to what you're saying.
Because of the film industry, creative personality types have been attracted to Hollywood. Creative artistic personalities have been attracted to Hollywood forever, and they come here, and it's like a big community. And you know, it's interesting with runaway production and the rest of the world catching up, and I don't know what's going to happen to the Hollywood scene. I mean, I think the late 60s, I mean, you're talking about an era. Okay, so the 1960s was an era when, you know, post-World War II, where a lot of the rest of the industrialized world was destroyed. So you had, if you were an artist living anywhere in the world, you wanted to come to Hollywood because there was nowhere else to go, you know? And it created an amazing vibe here. You know, Mondo Hollywood really depicted that, really captured that, I feel.
I mean, I have mixed feelings about that movie, a documentary. I do think as an archival research, it's very informative. I also think it can be for some people very dull due to its non-narrative approach.
It is kind of dull. But
I know it is kind of dull. I mean, because I want to be honest, there isn't a consistent plot theme. It does show a patchwork of different people, not just people in the creative industry. In fact, the creative people I felt to be the dullest people in this film.
All the people in the movie are creative people, though.
Oh, no. Wait, there's a woman who's a nurse, who's a black lady. She lives in South Central. There is
you're right. She's the only one. She's like the only normal person. She's the only normie.
There are people in it of all types, and they're pretty, for the most part, I thought, freaking ugly. It actually really shows, actually something that you can see in the last film I want to bring up, which is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Right. And, you know, I feel like
it's available on Stars.
I feel like Tarantino must have really borrowed from Mondo Hollywood when he made.
I think he borrowed from all the
part of
things
his
we
research.
Talked about. I think he borrowed from all the things we talked about. I think Mondo Hollywood, what's great about that is it, unlike any of the other things we talked about, it really shows the ugly, toxic narcissism of that time. That
narcissism.
For all of the, oh hell yeah, almost all those people are narcissists. Hell, you forget there's pedophilia in it. It is really Warning.
I did notice that. Would you say
Yeah.
that's pedophilia in that movie?
Hell yeah. A woman taking a shower with a small girl is pedophilia. It's not hardcore porn, but it is totally. Yeah. And she says that she likes it. No, seriously, dude, people are watching you right now. You really don't want to bet on that side of the argument. You don't want to be on that side of the equation. It is completely wrong. And I warn people about it. You're really seeing there's nudity, profanity. There are people who are just horrible. But I'll say this much. You can't just praise that era without also saying that was, the sexual liberation, drugs, the end of a repressive time in American culture.
Peak America.
People doing what they wanted to do. People coming out of wars and depressions. People coming out of the harder rules of civil behavior. There is such an ugliness to that documentary. Just such a hard underbelly.
Really?
To it. Now, Mike Herb, who produced that film, would go on to work with Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. He's very conservative, very anti-drug guy.
Ronald Reagan's in Mondo Hollywood too. And the interesting thing about that is he is part of the artist scene too in Mondo Hollywood. He bases a lot of his decisions on his astrologer's advice, which he did all through his whole administration, him and Nancy. Yeah. So he was very much of that scene.
Absolutely, and it really shows you, Mondo Hollywood absolutely shows you the convergence between both the, as you like to call them, the normies, the upper middle class, the conservatives, and the bohemians, and how there's an unholy alliance between them, maybe between the patrons and the performers. But you see it in the documentary that the woman who husband was the pharmacist for Los Angeles County, Mrs. White.
Right. Well, who
throws these society parties where they invite all these hippie types.
Yeah, right.
And, I think it's a good tonic in case you start to over-romanticize that era. It does remind you of all the things about that time that were pretty fucked up. And I do feel that at least moving on quickly to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I do want to get to it.
Well, do you want to go? You want to go?
Well, Jay Sebring is in.
Let's just keep going, Chris.
Jay Sebring is in Mondo Hollywood.
That's right.
And Jay Sebring would be one of the Manson victims. And
Tarantino just basically rewrote Mondo Hollywood into
my barber actually worked at a hair salon at that time, and his coworker was Sharon Tate's stylist. And actually, he had found out. He had partied with Sharon Tate, my barber, and these guys, and it's a very sweet girl. They even found out that she died before it was in the news. But, I think what's really nice about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is it really does show the convergence of all these, of all these various temperaments, the creative, the destructive, the narcissistic, the toxic. And
wow, you think it's more negative than I do.
Hell yeah.
I don't even think things have changed that much in Hollywood.
You can't glorify the Manson family. You cannot glorify the Manson family. The Manson family really shows you what happens when you take that level of indulgence. You take that level of narcissism. You take that to the extreme. Then, especially in a society where everyone thought they were free and open. After the Manson family, these homes, they stopped living in these homes where you can walk from one space to another, and they start living in compounds. Look at celebrity homes out here today. They're compounds.
Yeah, there's more gated communities going on. That's
just gated communities, but they live on these. I've been to like Mark Wahlberg's estate, which is in the hills.
Why were you at Mark Wahlberg's estate?
Longer story, but it's like a freaking college campus, and you cannot get into any major star's home.
Did you see Mark?
Any easier? No, but you can't get into any of these homes without. These are big entrances. These are big spaces. There are barriers. I mean, the 60s was like the time where people thought they could mix the classes and all these other creatives and the straights together. But really, that's what your result. I feel like what Tarantino is saying is that was the end of that era. That after that, really, the walls started to come up. Reagan is a good example of building those walls, of a protected community, keeping the upper middle class away from the middle class, the working class. And God knows, realizing that the hippie isn't always such a great free spirit. There's a lot of dark people in
this
the
reminds me a lot of the movie Dirty Harry. You've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Dirty
which is
Harry
based-
was very much a reaction against the hippies. You know, it was like an anti-hippie movie. It was one of the first real anti-hippie movies.
Yeah, which would usher in the 70s and would usher in eventually even Reagan in the 80s, a big movement away from all of the hippie stuff.
Like we're bringing up about Reagan, and he's in Mondo Hollywood. You know, Reagan is it's really interesting because Mondo Hollywood creates this Hollywood fantasy land, which still exists to some extent. I mean, because Hollywood still attracts the same kind of people, you know.
Yeah.
But the money isn't there. You know, the international clout isn't there anymore. But anyway, but it creates this fantasy world of Hollywood. But it's a real world. But Reagan is very much a part of it. He comes out of it. And he comes out of it with a lot of the ideas and a lot of the philosophies of that universe. And he applies.
As does Mike Curb, who produced Mondo Hollywood. Mike Curb comes out of that. He fires a whole bunch of artists off of his label in 1970 because they refused to stop using drugs. He gets into a big fight with Eric Burden of the Animals because the Animals is one of the bands. Well, Burden's like, you're not going to fire me, and I'm going to still use drugs. Curb ends up working for Nixon and for Reagan, and is part of a lot of people who came out of the 60s who were part of that artistic scene who go, you know what, maybe there's just a point where indulgence has to stop. Maybe there's just a point. I'm not trying to sound like a neoconservative, just really careful here.
You know what?
There is a counter-reformation.
I've heard that narrative. I've heard that narrative.
You can see it because it's not in the LA that we live in today.
I've heard that narrative.
We live in today is not that LA from the 60s.
I've heard that narrative, and you're making a good argument for that narrative, but I don't believe in it. I really think that.
Well, be careful. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying that was the counter.
It's more Hegelian, right? More Hegelian.
I'm just saying it just pivoted. Yes, it pivoted on the dialectic.
Synthesis. Right?
We're in synthesis now. Absolutely.
It's not really a counter-reformation.
But for those of you who are into it's a dialectic, and if you
there's a
for those Hegelians in the room, it's thesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and then you move up on the chain of dialectical history. So I'm saying
we're in a new time. I mean, I think we're
in a new paradigm. But
look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump is of that era too. I mean, he's from New York.
Honestly, he's really not. He is really more of a 70s, 80s person. That's for another show. I really want to stay on topic.
But Trump's not the kind of conservative that existed back in the back in the 60s, back in the 50s, back in the 30s.
I just want to talk about this Hollywood that you and I are, this valley, this era that on one hand came to us in such beautiful, brilliant colors. And I'm just going to read this to you because I think this explains a lot of why I'm the guy I am now, which is lovely. Don't you hate when your phone does that? Okay. But we were talking about the Monkees the last time on our show.
Hey, with the Monkees.
Stephen Stills was actually in Buffalo Springfield. And he was actually rejected for the Monkees, but he told Peter Tork. But it was this ad that they had at Barney's Beanery for all the young musician types who are going that really I love this ad. I found it here on Wikipedia. I'm going to read it to you. And it gives you such a sense of, in 1965, what they were looking for and why maybe it planted a seed. So it reads, madness, ! Auditions. Folk and rock and roll musicians, singers for acting roles in new TV series, running parts for 4 insane boys, ages 17 to 21, want spirited Ben Frank types, have courage to work, must come down for the interview. Ben Frank's was another big hippie hangout on Sunset Strip. I forgot, but you live right next to where it used to be.
Never heard of it.
You know where Mel's Drive-In is?
Yes.
That was Ben Frank's. So that was like the scene. So anyway, it's so clear, 4 insane boys. I mean, how could you not, as a child, want to not live in this psychedelic, colored, crazy, zany universe? Because the best thing I think they could ever have said about that is it was a time where a child could just basically go nuts in that world and color things. How could not? It's the perfect child's universe. And that's I think why it was so appealing to me. What do you think? What's your final thoughts?
Well, I think I've already told you what I think is Hollywood has very much attracted artistic-minded people throughout, the decades because of the film industry, and peak America was the 1960s. I mean, that's when the indulgence, the resources,
man. Huh? In your opinion, man, I don't.
That's my opinion.
Go there with you, but right, it's the American century. I get you.
60s was the American. That was the American decade, man. 1960s, probably. I mean, it was never better than that. It was all downhill from there.
All right. Well, my last question to you is there, when you walk by the whiskey, or when you're out in the hills or something, is there just a whisper? Is there something about that period of time that still lingers in the air for you? A time before you were even born.
Well, no.
All right.
The time is over, man. It's over.
So
I mean, you know what? There's still
a bright shining moment for you, is what
there's
you're
still
saying?
Artists who come here. There's still artists who come here from all over the world, and they try to do art or whatever.
But that's a world that now belongs to the past, like the Great Wild West or Camelot. Or is it a mythical past that never existed, like Camelot? Or
no, it existed. It's funny watching Mondo Hollywood. Okay, if you watch Mondo Hollywood as not knowing nothing about Hollywood, not having lived here, not having worked in entertainment at all, I think you'd get a different sense of it. You'd wonder, like, if all those people are just acting, if it's all made up. But watching Mondo Hollywood after lived here for so long, I don't know how long we lived here, 20 years or something, but and working around entertainment, it's real, man. That's how it is.
Well, then that's my point.
That's how it is. That's why I love Mondo Hollywood, because it really,
whether it's in Mondo Hollywood or Echo from the Canyon or any of these films that we've just talked about, there is a part of that world that still ever so slightly still exists. I just want to get one more film recommended before we go, which is The Party from 1968 with Peter Sellers. He plays an Indian. Can I just finish my point? Because you saw it. He plays an Indian, an East Indian. He lives out in the hills. He ends up going to a party of these types of people, and Claudine Longet is in it. And at the time, Sellers actually really was going to those parties and living among those people. And that was really the world he was in. And it's available to rent on YouTube. I like it. It's very much of its day. Is there any movie?
I want to just say about The Party. Yeah, The Party is definitely like a time capsule of a movie. I mean, I feel like when I watch it, I feel like the people who made it, they thought they were just doing like a slice of life, like this is how life is sort of thing. And you watch it now, and it's like watching science fiction almost.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's a very removed world.
Yeah, but that's a really good time capsule. You're asking me if you're asking me
on the topic. Any other movies you want to recommend on this topic of that period of Hollywood, whether it's a documentary or a film with a script? Any other ones that you want to recommend?
I'm thinking. Well, I wanted.
Okay. Well, while you're thinking, I will also throw out really quickly another film. I like the Beach Boys, so there's a documentary called "I Just Wasn't Made for These Times," which is good. And there's another one, I can't remember the title, but it was about Brian Wilson on the Smiley Smile tour. So if you're just into the Beach Boys, there's quite a few good docs on that. Back to you. Any thoughts in the time that I talked?
Well, I told you before we started, I wanted to recommend SOB, Blake Edwards movie, but you say it's too late.
No, but that's not the 60s. That's 1979, dude.
But listen.
1981. No. Dude, you got to keep it in the 60s. That's all.
But listen, he lived through the 60s. There's something that happens at the beginning of SOB that's very 60s. Very 60s.
It's the remnant
it's the most 60s thing. It's the most 60s thing I've ever seen.
But the 70s,
in a movie.
The 70s is his own story. So what's the most 60s thing? And then we're going to go.
Okay, the most 60s thing that ever in a movie is Blake Edwards is like some rich movie director, and he's driving through Laurel Canyon, you know, the street and the area, and there's like, it's still there. There's like a little country store like in the middle of Laurel Canyon, halfway between LA and North Hollywood, which are major urban areas. But there used to be a bunch of hippie kids used to hang out there, and I guess in the movie, I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen it. I think what happens in the movie, he picks up Rosanna Arquette. She's a hippie chick that's hanging out. Which is probably where Tarantino got his idea on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But he picks up a hippie chick that's just one of the hippie chicks hanging out there. It's Rosanna Arquette. And he picks her up because she has really nice boobs, right? And later on in the movie, she takes off her top, right? This is her first acting role, you know, because this is how she got it, whatever. But that kind of thing, just, I don't know if it happens anymore. I doubt it.
No, I mean, I'll say this much about the movie. Blake Edwards started in the 60s. He's from England. He did work with Peter Sellers, and you're right in that he made that movie as something that gave you the full sense of what it was like to live and work in Hollywood. And in that sense, his career starts in the 60s. So he is referencing stuff from the 60s. I have no idea.
In the movie, the director
in
picks up
1981, that was still kind of the deal.
Well, in the movie, in the movie, in the 70s, it might have happened. In the movie, he picks up a hippie chick because she has nice boobs. It takes her back to his place. And in real life, that's kind of how she gets the role too. I mean, there's a story.
What do you mean? Like in real life?
Story, yes. Edwards? In real life, the story, I mean, I'd have to look it up again, but the story is in real life, Blake Edwards was driving down the street. He saw Rosanna Arquette. She's a hippie chick, picked her up, and now she became an actress. So,
well, the Arquettes were hippies. That much is true. Exactly. But I don't think, did he flip with her, or did he just pick her up because she had an interesting look?
I have not been able to verify that.
Okay, well, that would.
But he did pick her up.
Doing. Okay, well, there's a story in there somewhere, but I think we're
life imitating art, art imitating life.
We're out of time today, so I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to what was a very long conversation. Hopefully, an entertaining conversation or revealing. I learned a lot from you, Randall.
You did? What'd you learn?
I just learned about Rosanna Arquette. And, you know, I learned about when you thought it was the best time in American history. I learned that you really like Mondo Hollywood. I learned a lot of stuff. And, you know, so I want to thank everybody for watching. I'm Chris Corbell.
Randall Mills. Thank you.
Stay safe and be well.